Chapter 7. The Reign of the Rani. The doctor stood stock still in the Venusian Aikido guard stance and stared down at the prone figure of a woman clad in black biker gear. Her helmet lay discarded nearby. He looked down in horror at a face so recently revealed to him, its eyes closed, breathing faintly. He stared at the face of the Rani. A sound now drifted into the TARDIS, faintly and from outside, the sound of another TARDIS launching. At that sound, the woman's eyes flicked open. She leapt to her feet, clearly revitalized and energized by the panic this noise caused. She spun with desperate haste towards the stairs leading up to the main doors of this TARDIS, and ran a few steps before stopping. Her shoulders slumped. She had clearly been trying to reach the other TARDIS. It was equally clear she had accepted this as impossible to achieve on foot. She turned now slowly to regard the doctor with a furious glare. "Rani, what the devil are you doing? And why are you here? And there?" With these last words, he nodded towards the entrance doors of his TARDIS. It was through these that the Rani had so recently departed, abducting K9 in the process, and where presumably she had boarded another TARDIS. It had seemed impossible that this woman's frown could deepen any further, or her eyes become more fiery, and yet they did. She walked with determined steps towards the doctor, who instinctively raised his guard a little in response. She did not herself respond to this shift, and instead simply walked around his outstretched arms to stand next to and slightly in front of him. Then she punched him hard in the shoulder. "Ow!" the doctor cried, taking half a step sideways and rubbing his shoulder vigorously with a pained expression. "You are an idiot!" the woman yelled in his face, exasperation personified. For the time being, the doctor was utterly flabbergasted by this inexplicable and outlandish behavior. "I cannot believe you failed to recognize me. Twice," she continued. "What? Recognize? Twi?" the doctor mumbled in confusion. For her part, the woman just continued to stare at him, one eyebrow raised, waiting impatiently. The doctor looked between her and his aching shoulder, and gradually an uncertain look of recognition spread across his features. "Romana?" he gasped in utter disbelief. Romana threw up her hands in exasperation. "At last! Yes, Romana, the one and the same. The one and only, in fact." The doctor staggered back against the main console, clutching his head. "This is a little confusing," he said faintly. Romana stuck her hands on her hips. "Confusing? I would have thought it was plain enough. The Rani stole my identity and went traveling with you, all the while plotting to use you to her own ends. What is difficult to understand? The only thing which might be is how you didn't realize it wasn't me." The doctor stood up a little straighter now as his wits rearranged themselves. He felt the need to defend himself rising. "She had your clothes on. She had adopted one of your hairstyles, mannerisms, everything. She was very convincing." Romana rolled her eyes. "Convincing? Really? So is that all it takes to fool you? All someone needs to do to trick their way onto the TARDIS is dress up like one of your old companions and change their hair? Tell me, does this happen to you often?" Romana asked, her hands once more upon her hips. The doctor looked awkward and embarrassed as he found it hard to find the words to counter this. He just raised his hands and spluttered, allowing Romana the opening to continue. "It wasn't even the last dress or hairstyle you saw me with." "But she had your face," the doctor finally managed. Romana cocked her head. Her eyes narrowed at the doctor. "Ah, true. She did complete her disguise by regenerating into my current face. Perhaps I should cut you some slack," she said with labored consideration. "Well, yes," the doctor began. "You have to admit that was a very committed performance." Romana suddenly snapped her fingers and shook her head in mock regret. "Oh, except you have never actually met me in this regeneration before. Hello, by the way. Long time no see." she said suddenly, extending her hand towards the doctor. Once again, he looked confused, then reached towards it. Romana slapped his hand away before returning her own to her waist. You have never seen this face before, so you cannot use that excuse. Unless you have been stalking my progress through the Gallifreyan archives. Well, have you? The doctor sighed, frowning. No, of course not. Well, there we go then. The doctor studied Romana intently. It really is you, isn't it? He asked, but with a tone that betrayed no doubt. Romana returned his frown and shook her head in weary exasperation. We are Time Lords, you and I. Even though our faces change, we usually have a good intuition as to who each other is. I knew you were you the first time I saw you, albeit from afar. Even with your new face. Don't you know me, Doctor? Or would you like the TARDIS to scan me and confirm against records? The doctor shook his head. I know it's you. I won't be fooled again, he said with utter conviction. But why? He continued. Didn't you confront her? Confront us both? Revealed her as the imposter and yourself as the real Romana. As you said, the TARDIS could have confirmed who was telling the truth. Romana shook her head. No, Doctor, I could not do that. The Rani was never more than a few feet away from you at all times. You know she is a devious, ruthless, and cunning criminal. She doubtless always had some hidden weapon, a gun, a knife, a needle. Who knows? If at any point she had thought your usefulness was at an end, she almost certainly would have killed you then and there, made the best of what she had already obtained and probably run off with your TARDIS. Here she paused, looking forlorn. Instead of making off with mine. The doctor understood her loss and was sympathetic in body and voice. So, what did you do? He asked kindly. Romana sighed with resignation and continued her tale. I discovered the Rani's break-in when I returned home. She must have been in quite a rush, as she had barely made any efforts to cover her tracks. I guess she might have already known I would not confront you both directly, for the reasons I just gave. All the security footage was there. I saw her raiding my wardrobes, watched her regenerate into a Rani with my face, the monster. Watched as she broke into my TARDIS, for the first time, that is. I was quite surprised to find it was still there, where I left it. Once again, though, she had not bothered to hide her movements. My TARDIS logs showed she had performed a site-to-site time transport, and to where. And so I resolved to do what I could, to follow you incognito, until I could devise a plan to rescue you. The doctor nodded slowly. I understand, even though I am ill-used to the concept of being rescued. So that explains your first appearance at Foxgrove Cemetery, I suppose. Romana allowed herself a small, smug grin. That was the first time you saw me, she said archly. And the Levithian mercenary on Mondus, I'll warrant. Romana inclined her head in acknowledgement. Those are two examples, yes. The doctor nodded impatiently. But neither instance worked out as you had hoped, did they? Romana pursed her lips peevishly. Then she shrugged. No, not exactly. Outside Foxgrove Cemetery, I had hoped to incapacitate the Rani, or at least separate her far enough from you to intervene. Unfortunately, she avoided me and threw herself over you. She couldn't have got much closer. And your Levithian mercenary? Romana chuckled ruefully. Yes. Well, I had managed to temporarily take over the duties of Jayan Bayer's regular hired heavy. When she had called me through with the rifle, I thought for a moment I had the Rani cold. But she gripped your shoulder as soon as I raised my rifle, and I knew she would kill you long before I could take her down. So I beat an inglorious and hasty retreat. The doctor shook his head in sympathy. The Rani is resourceful. Romana did not look entirely pleased or impressed by the doctor's assessment. She has her moments, she conceded grudgingly. And so finally you caught up with us here on Janus, the doctor concluded. Romana nodded. I landed here after you had already left your TARDIS. My chameleon circuit was set to a large tree, and I'd landed quite close to your own Type 40. Too close, it seems, since the Rani must have noticed it. She certainly found it quickly enough once she left here. The doctor nodded vigorously. Yes, that was a little careless, he agreed. Romana found herself glaring at the doctor once again. Well, you didn't notice it. You didn't even notice the Rani was the Rani. The doctor coughed awkwardly. Yes, well, it's possible, just remotely, that I may have been a tiny bit careless myself. Possibly. Possibly, Romana growled, still frowning. A tiny bit, the doctor replied quickly. The doctor and Romana stared at each other for a few uncomfortable moments. The doctor decided to break the silence. You know, I didn't trust her entirely. I had my suspicions about the Rani from quite early on, he said confidently. Really? Romana said skeptically. Oh yes, the doctor said insistently, from when she produced that handkerchief with the ridiculous R monogram. Romana unzipped one of the pockets of her leather jacket. Slowly, she withdrew an identical monogrammed white handkerchief. She stole that from my collection along with my old dress and boots. Yes, the doctor responded, somewhat flustered. It wasn't the handkerchief per se. It was what she said immediately afterwards. Romana raised a skeptical eyebrow. Which was? When she mentioned my fixation with question marks. That referred to a period long after we had parted company. When I was in that phase, we had almost no interaction. Romana mused. And that was enough to make you suspicious? Absolutely, the doctor agreed loudly. Then his tone softened and lost some of its bluster. There were a few other things, though. Romana became genuinely curious. Really? Such as? Well, she seemed a little less steady than you usually were. I mean, one could write it off to a new regeneration. Still, she did seem a little more susceptible to panic than I would expect from you. Romana allowed him the faintest of indulging smiles. I see. Anything else? The doctor scratched his head for a moment. Well, she also seemed a little too obsessed by power, and her arrogance was a little cold, even by your standards. The smile had evaporated now, replaced once more by the frown. Even by my standards, eh? Oh, yes, the doctor agreed vigorously. You were far more easy to bear. Easy to bear, Romana repeated slowly. I see. The doctor stepped closer to Romana now, all playfulness or bumbling gone in an instant, utterly serious and sincere. Romana, in her turn, did not back away but returned his gaze, ready for whatever ensued. I am very glad to have met the real Romana. I need her, need you, to help undo all the mess, of my own making or otherwise. Will you help me save the universe? Romana gave the doctor a hard stare. I will help you stop the Rani. I will help you save the universe, if at all possible. Thank you, the doctor responded simply. Romana held up a hand. And after that, I shall be returning home. I think I shall by that time have had just about as much of you as I can bear. The doctor sighed and nodded his assent. As you wish. Romana now walked past the doctor to stare at the main console. It seemed she was familiarizing herself with its current configuration. As she did so, she asked, What now, doctor? What exactly is the Rani playing at? The doctor joined Romana at the main console, a couple of panels over from her own position. The Rani has abducted K9 and with it, my four-dimensional stress set, FDSS if you prefer. She intends to take it to the weakest point she can find in our space-time fragment and use it to force her way into the bulk. She seeks to travel there and join the ranks of the 11-dimensional godlike entities found therein. In the process, she will naturally destroy our universe once and for all. Romana looked horrified. That's insane. And even if it weren't, throwing herself into the bulk would certainly drive her mad. The doctor shook his head. She does not believe so, he began gravely. She thinks that with enough training and time devoted to this, she can survive the transition, thrive even as a newborn god entity of the bulk. And no doubt she will lay low in our space-time fragment and give herself that time, until she is ready to execute her plan. She is a Time Lord with a TARDIS, after all, that much would not be hard. Romana nodded her agreement. Yes, it is unlikely we could find her just by searching the universe blindly, even reduced as it is, if she truly wishes to remain hidden. Quite so, Romana, the doctor concurred. However, he continued, eventually she will make a break for it. As soon as we met, she had angled to head for the weakest point in our space-time fragment. The doctor stared intently into Romana's eyes now. I know where she will go. He set various knobs and levers on the main console and threw the launch lever. The TARDIS was off now, flying through time and space, sailing with ease in its natural environment. "Doctor, where are we going?" Romana asked. The doctor looked down at the long brown coat he was wearing over his more usual black suit, complete with DMs. "Well, I might as well keep this on, just for this one final stop," he said distractedly. "Which is?" Romana pressed, a little impatiently. "The South Pole, Earth, where I launched from the moment the universe shattered, or at least as close as we can get." Romana looked puzzled. "As close as we can get? What do you mean?" The doctor stroked his chin. "In a way, you might say our space-time fragment started there. That location and event in time and space forms a vertex, if you will, an ever-narrowing portion of our universe, terminating at a point. In reality, we can never force the TARDIS back to that singularity, as it were. Listen to her." Even as the doctor had been speaking, a subtle shift in the tone of the TARDIS's engines had become apparent. There was a slow but steady climb in pitch. It was almost like a car engine with the clutch slowly being disengaged, the engine left to race ever faster as less and less work was done. The doctor studied the displays on the main console intently. "We are barely moving at all. Might as well engage the materialization circuit." This was closest to Romana, and so she duly obliged. The tone of the TARDIS began to take on a more strained note. As they listened, it almost sounded a little like grinding. "That doesn't sound good," Romana noted. "Well, it's bound to be a little rough, landing under these conditions." As the landing continued, the engines began to acquire a high-pitched scraping noise. Romana looked at the display showing their landing location, slowly pulsing in and out of view. "Doctor, what color is the South Pole?" she asked. The doctor frowned. "Well, white, mostly," he replied, a little confused. "So, not black then," Romana responded. The doctor dashed round to share her view. While still pulsing in and out of sight, it was clear the plains and outcrops of the Antarctic tundra were now black from horizon to horizon. The doctor frantically twiddled controls to zoom in the picture. Every surface was covered with penguins, but there was something not quite right about them. The doctor flicked on the audio receiver. The main console room was filled with squeaking, gibbering, and laughter, the laughter of children. The doctor realized these penguins were entirely black, not a patch of white to be seen. "No, no, 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 no!" the doctor cried as he dashed back round to the navigation control panel. The scraping sound from the engines now sounded like metal tearing upon metal. "Doctor, what is it?" Romana asked in shock and horror. "It's a trap," the doctor yelled. "Full astern," he now cried rather redundantly as he was handling the controls. "Emergency time warp." The TARDIS jerked suddenly. The grinding and squeaking did not cease, but now was joined by a persistent rattling vibration. The doctor dashed back round to the view screen Romana was using, and together they monitored the scene before them. The black South Pole was still pulsing in and out of sight, and at first it seemed nothing had changed. Then, gradually, the time the screen spent blank seemed to outlast the time spent on the landing site. Slowly, painfully slowly, the South Pole faded and ultimately vanished from view. At the same time, the grinding and scraping diminished, the vibrations subsiding with them. Finally, the TARDIS was flying normally, free at last. "What was all that?" Romana asked as she breathed a sigh of relief. "Creatures of the bulk. The Rani and I discovered a device, a brass sphere on Mondas. It was designed to attract them, and it was particularly effective where our isolation from the bulk was weakest. And here it was very weak indeed. She must have left the sphere here with a new, longer-lasting power source. She played me, knew I would come here, and never intended this location for her real plan. What a fool I've been." Romana frowned. While still far from friendly towards the doctor, she could not but feel a little for his utter dejection. "Yes, you have been. But it's a great place to build from." The doctor chuckled a little. "Really? Is that the best you can do?" Romana stroked her chin thoughtfully. "No, I don't believe it is," she said slowly. "What do you mean?" the doctor asked. "The Rani spent days with you, working with you, helping you, learning how your mind works." Yes, the doctor replied tetchily. "There's no need to rub it in." Romana shook her head. "That's not what I mean. She knew where you would want to go, given the information received and your own logical mind. The doctor inclined his head in agreement. So, Romana continued, we need to go where she knows you would never want to go, or would never wish to return to. You need to think where that might be, in the context of her plans. The doctor's eyes widened as he stared at her in surprise. You really are Romana, aren't you? He said with an impressed smile. One tries, she responded with a waggle of her eyebrows, and the barest hint of a smile. The doctor stood up straight and stretched. He then looked at his outstretched arms. He quickly flicked a few switches on the main console. A hat stand materialized nearby. The doctor removed the long brown coat and hung it there. Won't be needing that anymore, he said. Not where we're going anyway, he finished. On the driveway leading from the front door of an unremarkable Ealing suburban house stood a UPS delivery truck. Then, and by no means all at once, it was joined by a blue police telephone box. The doors opened, and out strode the doctor and Romana. They both stopped in front of the brown and beige van. Your TARDIS, I believe, the doctor said. I believe you're right, Romana agreed. Then they turned away from it and walked on towards the house. The door was still wide open, just as the doctor and the Rani had left the place several days ago, at least in the doctor's personal timeline. More cautiously now, they entered the residence of the late Sarah Jane Smith, alert for and wary of any further traps. They mounted the stairs carefully and quietly passed through the door of the attic. The attic was exactly as the doctor had left it, chaotic and filled with Sarah Jane, unit, and Time Lord memorabilia. There was, however, one significant difference. The wall safe to the black hole accretion disk was wide open. Seeing no further need to creep, the doctor walked over to the open hatch and stared at the scene beyond. Master! Master! She forced me to do it! She overrode my programming! These cries came from K9, still clutched under the Rani's arm. The Rani herself floated perhaps 6 feet beyond the hatch itself in open space. On her head was a very simple goldfish bowl-like breather unit of typical Gallifreyan design. Other than this, she was still dressed in Romana's old clothes. The Rani laughed uncontrollably as she saw the doctor and Romana before her. You are too late, the Rani cried, spitting each word at them. Behind her, between her and the accretion disk, stood an insane gash in space and time. It was tall and narrow, and what could be seen within defied easy explanation. It was as if every color, every texture, every sensation clamored to exist at once inside this rift in reality. Monster! Romana spat back at her. You cannot stop me, the Rani further opined. I have spent months mastering the mysteries of the bulk. I have slowly and gradually acclimatized myself to the visions and sensations of that realm, with the aid of this annoying tin toy here, with its FDSS. At this point, the Rani cast K9 a contemptuous look before continuing. With it, I was able to open micro-rifts, to touch and taste the bulk in small controlled doses, to adjust my senses, to become one with the bulk. K9, the doctor cried. Can you move? Negative, Master, the robot replied. All thrusters still inoperative. The doctor thought for a moment. How are your internal gyros? All functioning normally, Master. The doctor leaned through the hatch now and yelled, Try spinning! Immediately K9 spun and tumbled frantically on the spot. Although he remained at the same point in space, more or less, the Rani's grip had been broken, and she slowly drifted away from him. For a moment she desperately tried to reach for him, then looked over her shoulder and smiled. I keep telling you, Doctor, you are too late. It has already served its purpose. It forced open the rift here, gave me my conduit to the bulk. I have no further need of your device. I have no intention of coming back, for there will be nowhere to come back to soon enough. My trajectory is set. My future, at least, is assured. It was clear the Rani was drifting towards the rift. A strange rumbling began to fill the doctor and Romana's minds. It was not so much a sound as a fundamental vibration permeating everything, mind, body, soul. It could no more be heard by the Time Lords than a bell can hear itself when struck, when the whole of existence tolls. The universe is dissolving, the doctor cried desperately. What can we do? Romana yelled, equally disturbed. There is but one hope. We need K9 back here. They both looked again upon the scarf-clad, crowned K9. By now, the Rani was practically touching the threshold of the rift. K9, is one end loose? Somehow K9 understood the doctor's cryptic question. Affirmative, Master. Then try spinning again. This time, K9 spun in a very complex and deliberate pattern. As he did so, the scarf unthreaded from his body and spooled towards the opening. The doctor leaned forward, Romana gripping his legs to keep him anchored. He caught the end of the scarf, the other end hooked in undignified fashion on K9's tail. Quickly now, the doctor pulled hand over hand and brought K9 to him, grabbing him by the body and dragging him through the hatch. The Rani had all but disappeared in the substance within the rift. Still, her voice could faintly be heard, laughing all the while. Too late! Too late! Meanwhile, the tremors in the universe were becoming quite disorienting. The doctor blasted K9 with the sonic screwdriver and released all the blocks and controls the Rani had placed upon him. Quickly, K9! Use the FDSS! Seal the rift! I shall attempt to, Master, but I may have insufficient power. K9 began emitting strange noises. The universe quake stopped growing but did not subside. The rift also remained unchanged. Master, I can only maintain the status quo. I cannot close the rift or reverse the damage. The doctor ripped open K9's maintenance hatch and stuffed the sonic screwdriver inside. He added what power remained in the device to K9's own. Like some chaos-fueled aged clam, the rift slowly began to narrow. The universe quake also quietened. Just before the final line of a crack closed, a familiar voice drifted to the doctor and Romana. Too late. Then the Rani was gone. The doctor slumped to sit upon the floor next to K9 and withdrew his arm. He reached up and pushed the safe door closed, but lacked the strength or will to seal it properly at that moment. Romana sat down next to the doctor, shoulder to shoulder. Did we do enough? Did we fix the universe? She asked. The doctor turned his head wearily to regard her own tired face. We did enough. We did not fix the universe. How bad is it? Romana asked grimly. The doctor gestured with his hands, non-committally. Well, the rift is closed. The Rani is in the bulk. We stopped the utter destruction of our universe here and now, but the Rani's actions have brought its end far, far closer. Doubtless the fragments of the universe are now dissolving, and this will only worsen and accelerate with time. What can we do? We still need to find the cause, the thing which shattered the universe to shards in the first place, and reverse it. We can only hope the universe is not too far gone to heal itself. Romana stood up and offered her hand to the doctor. Back to the TARDIS, then. The doctor took her hand and allowed her to help him up. Indeed. There is much to do, and far to go. Romana cocked her head, struck by a thought. The Rani is now in the bulk, yes? The doctor nodded. So it would seem. Romana shook her head in disbelief. Then she won. She got what she wanted. She joined the ranks of the bulk entities, gained the powers, knowledge, and understanding of 11-dimensional existence. The Rani won. The doctor frowned. Perhaps so. But it reminds me of an Earth expression. Really? Romana responded curiously. Which one? The doctor gave a grim smile. Be careful what you wish for. Addendum. What you wish for. What follows is not a true telling, for this is a tale of the bulk, and as such this realm defies description by mere mortals limited to 4 dimensions. Space, time, events, history, thought, experiences. None of these will translate from 11 dimensions down to a paltry 4. Imagine trying to describe an actual tennis match to a game of Pong. Our task here is infinitely more impossible. So, all that can be written here is an analogy. A story, if you will. Now, some will decry anything but the literal truth as a lie. They will see no value in anything other than a harsh, mathematical description of the dimensions of things. And it is hard not to have some sympathy with their position, for their desire for absolute truth at least. And yet sometimes, if we are lucky, a story can hide a deeper truth, and in the telling bring it to light. And so, with your understanding and forgiveness, I shall tell my tale of the bulk. The Rani stood upon a vast plain. It was utterly smooth and featureless, and impossible as this may seem, appeared to stretch in all directions forever. Its color, for as much as that concept had any real meaning, could be a greenish-brown but was otherwise unremarkable. The Rani looked about her, aghast. Now she looked up. The sky above her boiled with insane, unimaginable colors, twisted and danced with crazed shapes, entities of the bulk engaged in whatever passed for activities or functions in 11 dimensions. And as much as distance had any real meaning, they seemed vast distances away from the Rani. A realization slowly crept upon the Rani's mind as she looked again at the featureless plain around her. The realization gave way to horror, and she raised her hands skywards and screamed in frustration and terror. No! If it were possible in the 11-dimensional realm to pan outwards and away from the Rani, she would slowly shrink in our field of vision to become an infinitesimally small point. Ultimately, she would become too small to see at all. Yet the plane on which she stood would still look to us exactly as it had before. If we persevered, however, panned and panned until we had covered, say, 200,000 light years, if such measures had any meaning here, we might begin to see a slight curvature in that surface. If we went out still further, maybe 10 or 100 times more, we would begin to see it as a tube. We would have to step quite a bit further back to truly appreciate it for what it was. One tentacle among many, upon just one of the innumerable entities of the bulk.
Masters, mistresses, the Doctor requires materials in order to maintain the TARDIS and ensure continued functionality. He similarly requires carbon-based comestibles to sustain his own biological functions and existence. Master would never say this, but he requires aid beyond that supplied by this unit in order to acquire these. To aid the Doctor in his various tasks and creations, this can be most effectively achieved via Patreon or Substack subscriptions, or through donations directly to PayPal. Or if you desire physical goods in return for your contributions, written accounts of my travels with the Doctor are also available on Amazon. Links are in the description below. Thank you, Masters, mistresses.